This will be video 2. So looking at the San Quentin Canal, one of Napoleon's major achievements was this canal that was opened up in 1810. You can see it charted right here. So he had a canal developed in France, the St. Quentin Canal, that developed in 1810. This developed a network of connected rivers to get coal and iron from northern France down to Paris, where they could use it more in their factories, or factories with a lowercase f. Yeah. So this developed a network of connected rivers to help get the coal and iron out of northern France easier to factories around France. Eventually, more canals will be made to help connect more ports, and it will allow barges to transport not just coal and iron, but things like grain and other things too. So grain, coal and iron, all that gets transported. I guess they can finally make some bread now to shut the people up, right? Then he adopts the same kind of thing that Britain did and makes the Bank of France, which, if you remember, is a copy of the Bank of Amsterdam, right? So a copy of a copy. But this just goes back to point out, this whole bank idea that was very prominent in this time period, right? Because the same argument's happening in America at the same time. Because, remember, Jefferson didn't like the bank, then he got rid of the bank, then we fought the War of 1812, and they're like, oh crap, we need a bank, right? So it goes back and forth. But this whole bank of a country idea was very prominent around this time period. So France also makes a Bank of France, or Napoleon specifically, and it becomes France's main financial institution. It helped fund government infrastructure projects, including railroad expansion. This is in the key concept, something we'll be aware of, that it points out that much more of the continental European countries relied on who or what to produce a lot of their industrialization. The government. So I would have that down. So the government was way more involved in developing their industries in the continental Europe than it was in actual Britain. So the bank helped fund government infrastructure projects like railroad expansion, and the government also supported industrial expansion too. But that's a big theme in the key concepts. That's a difference between Britain and continental Europe. All right. British tech helps France. So basically what starts to happen for multiple countries is that they all begin to steal British stuff, right? America does it, France does it, Prussia does it. They all do it. They just take what Britain already has and just adopt it. So after Napoleon, the country renewed industrial growth. So basically after Napoleon was gone, post-1815, now they can just do whatever kind of industrial growth they want. It doesn't have to be just military oriented. Remember a lot of aristocrats had escaped to flee the revolution. Well, a lot of them ended up living where during the revolution? In Napoleon. Britain. So when they left, they brought what with them? British stuff. Yeah, British stuff, right? The tech or the ideas from Britain. In the 1830s, France acquired access to British weaving tech and started to use looms with multiple spindles. So in the 1830s, France acquired access to British weaving tech and started to use looms with multiple spindles. And Britain tried to have a monopoly on this. Britain made it where you could not share that information. So several countries stole it, like France, like America. There was a guy from Britain who came, Samuel Slater, who came from there and basically just told us how to do all this stuff, right? Yeah. So basically a lot of this, they tried to control it though. They didn't want to have competition. They weren't just oh yeah, you guys come check out our stuff. So they tried to control it, but it didn't work out, right?
The good people.
Exactly. So France begins to use weaving tech in the 1830s. This helps to revive their silk industry. So again, they're all about luxury stuff in France. They never do heavy industry, a bunch of iron or oil, whatever. It's always luxury type stuff. So a lot of silks. They also developed a lot of cotton manufacturing. They also developed a lot of cotton manufacturing too. There's a territory that's going to get swapped around a lot. I think we mentioned it once before. Alsace is a territory that gets swapped between Germany and France a few times in the century and the next, which we'll talk about it more later on. Alsace was a coal-rich area that France controlled. That began to attract a lot of manufacturers, which is one of the reasons why it's such a sought-after territory, because it has a very valuable resource. More on that later on, though. There was a French innovator or developer, Francois de Wendel. He began to use steam engines to mine coal, so he adapted the steam engine to mine coal for France. He also introduced the British method of smelting iron. So de Wendel brings in steam engine to help mine coal, but he also introduces the British model for smelting iron too. Smelting iron. All right, French railroads. So, after Napoleon, France began to build railroads, again, basically taking that from Britain. So they began to introduce British locomotives and rails to France post-Napoleon in 1815, after 1815. By 1827, the French had constructed the first railway line on the continent. So by 1827, they had the first not continental railroad, but like country-wide line, essentially, at that point. It initially ran for 11 miles, carrying coal and iron, so just kind of like, it's a necessity, right? They built it for carrying out goods and supplies, but eventually they'll build on it and grow it larger and larger to where it'll connect all the major cities. So at first, it was only 11 miles of railways that got the mines to the factories. Then they'll eventually add on passenger cars, and then train travel will become more normal by the 30s and 40s in France. So railway lines expanded throughout the 1800s, but the government, not private companies, sponsored expansion. And that's even a difference for America. So like Britain and America, it was all private companies, or pretty much all private companies that created railroads. For France and Germany and these other countries, when they made railroads, it was pretty much all done by the government. So that's even a difference for the United States. Because the United States, all our railroads are made by private companies. But in France, it's the government. Then you get trade agreements and tariffs. Trade agreements and tariffs. Trade agreements and tariffs. Trade agreements and tariffs. In the French government, they try to protect its kind of infant industries with tariffs. So it's not so much mercantilism anymore. But what you kind of want to be aware of, and this is not just France, many of these countries early on in the Industrial Revolution will all raise tariffs to try to block out competing products. So we're kind of beyond the mercantilism time frame, but in early industrialization, they're still wanting to have higher tariffs to try to block out any competitors. And it's not just France. In some cases, France would even ban the importation of goods altogether. So in some cases, they might ban the importation of some other country's goods altogether, just to protect their own. What you do begin to see happen, though, around 1830s, 1840s, is that not just in Britain, but other countries too, like in France, there are people who believe that if you have free trade, it'll develop a better economy. So kind of second half of the 1800s, many countries begin to reduce their tariffs and their restrictions. So like 1860s kind of onward, Britain, France, and others begin to reduce their tariffs and begin to promote more free trade. So I would kind of have that down, that basically when industrialization starts, there's a lot more higher tariffs making, but then by the time you get to the back half of the 1800s, many countries like France begin to reduce those tariffs. And that lasts until imperialism becomes big, and when imperialism gets big, then they go back to the imperialism. Good old imperialism. So that's France. Everybody's good on France? Yay? Great. Fantastic. Alright, looking at Prussia. Still no what yet? No Germany. Germany does not unify until 71 of this century. So we're still not there yet. But the most dominant German state is what? Prussia. So Prussia is the most dominant state at this point. All right. So in the 1700s, Prussia had focused on building a strong military to protect itself because it was so small. So in the 1700s, with all its various Fredericks, they had focused on developing a strong military to protect themselves against any foreign attacks or, people trying to take their territory, whatever the case is. And they turned themselves into one of the strongest armies in the continent because they know that Russia as well as France might try to come after them and take their territory. But remember that, looking at the map here too, while Prussia exists up here, a lot of this area here, no longer the HRE. Remember that, who abolished the HRE? Napoleon does, right? So Napoleon abolishes the HRE, creates the German Confederation. So there's still multiple states here, but Prussia up here is still the most dominant one of all of them. As the Industrial Revolution spread in Europe, it's going to make Prussia stronger and become more influential. And this will be important because Prussia is going to be the state that eventually does what? Unifies Germany, right? Or creates Germany. So industrialization makes Prussia stronger throughout the 1800s, which is going to help lead to its unification. And that's what the key concept wants you to basically be aware of. Germany had a lot of deposits of coal and iron. So Germany had a lot of deposits of coal and iron. So, like France, they begin to steal some British stuff. So, like, they'll steal textile technology in the late 1700s. So, they'll begin to adopt and develop textiles themselves in the late 1700s, which they borrow from the British. I'll stop this video here just to